The true awakening is not to find the light, but to die to every illusion until only the real remains. You've believed your entire life that awakening meant finding peace. But what if that were the most convenient lie ever told? What if, instead of light, true awakening was a direct confrontation with the raw essence of human nature, with everything you've always avoided seeing? The first truth that needs to be said is this: consciousness is not a gift, it's a sentence. And as Machiavelli taught, every sentence brings with it not only pain, but also the possibility of power. The awakening that many today romanticize as spiritual elevation may simply be an elegant way to escape the brutality of reality. But reality cannot be erased, cannot be silenced, and sooner or later it erupts as chaos. You don't choose when you awaken. What you can choose is whether you will have the courage to look within when it does. Machiavelli observed kings, princes, courtiers, and enemies, and knew that there is no politics without illusion. People believe in masks because they need them to survive the spectacle of life. But deep down, beneath every gesture, every smile, every promise of virtue, lies a calculation. You think you live guided by values, but what really drives your choices is the fear of loss, the desire for recognition, the need to maintain some kind of control. This is the hidden foundation on which not only society, but also your own mind is built. When you begin to awaken, you don't find a clean soul. You find the theater of internal manipulation that has always guided your steps. This is devastating because it forces you to face life not as you wish it to be, but as it truly is. The first shock is realizing that what we call virtue is rarely pure. Generosity can hide a need for approval. Humility can be just a disguise for vanity. Patience can mean fear of action. And the pursuit of spirituality, so celebrated in modern times, can be just another ego project trying to prove one's specialness. Machiavelli would say that every ruler needs to appear virtuous, but can never rely on virtue to maintain power. The same rule applies to you. Perhaps you believed that being good was enough, that life would reward your sincerity, your sweetness, your kindness. But what if awakening is precisely the ruin of that belief? What if you discover that by living your life trying to please, you've only become hostage to other people's games? Kindness without strategy doesn't liberate, it enslaves. Imagine waking up one day with the feeling that nothing makes sense. Words seem hollow, faces seem like masks, gestures seem rehearsed. This is the first sign that the illusion is fading. It's uncomfortable because it reveals something you've always known but never had the courage to admit. Almost everything in life is theater, and you've been both actor and audience. Machiavelli observed this theater in palaces and republics, but the logic is universal. Power rarely reveals itself directly. It acts through symbols, through silences, through subtle manipulations that shape behavior. Awakening is the moment when you finally realize you've always been on stage. And then the question arises: are you ready to take on the role of strategist, or will you remain a supporting character in your own life? The emotion of this moment is contradictory. Part of you wants to run back to the comfort of illusion, because chaos is frightening. Another part feels there is no going back, that closing your eyes doesn't erase what has already been seen. This tension is inevitable and necessary. Machiavelli wrote that men prefer the illusion of security to the truth that threatens them. But he added that only those who face the truth, even if cruel, have a chance to govern themselves and others. It's no different in the inner realm. Those who awaken can no longer rely on easy certainties. They must accept that life is unstable, that the mind is contradictory, that the heart is ambiguous, and that precisely in this instability lies the possibility of freedom. This is where many give up. They look for shortcuts. They seek gurus, mantras, courses, formulas for transcendence. They try to transform awakening into consumption, another product, another practice, another distraction. They fail to realize that they are merely replacing one prison with another. Machiavelli would say that exchanging one tyrant for another does not change the condition of the people. It only changes the face of the oppressor. Within you, the same thing happens. If before you were a slave to routine and the opinions of others, now you risk becoming a slave to the spiritual ideal you constructed. And this ideal is even more dangerous because it dresses in the guise of virtue. It seems noble, but it imprisons. It seems light, but it blinds. True awakening requires you to recognize the trap and refuse to enter it. The emotional impact grows when you understand that ruin isn't a failure, it's a process. Inner collapse doesn't mean you've gone mad, but that you're seeing without the filters that previously maintained apparent order. Machiavelli observed that when a state falls apart, the vices that always existed only become visible. The same is true for you. When the internal structure begins to crumble, it's not because evil has emerged from nowhere, but because what was already hidden has come to the surface. Your anger, your envy, your repressed desire, your thirst for power, everything you've denied finally comes to light. It's terrifying because it shatters your self-image, but it's also liberating because it offers the chance to become whole. Whole doesn't mean pure, it means real. You might ask yourself, why go through this? Why choose to walk toward a chaos that threatens your sanity, your identity, your life? Machiavelli would answer, because there is no other way to govern one's existence. The prince who knows no cruelty will be victimized by the cruelty of others. The individual who does not recognize his own shadow will be manipulated by it forever. Escape is not an option. The true strategy is to cross over. Only those who know the monsters within can negotiate with them, tame them, and transform them into allies. Those who deny remain hostage. Those who accept become strategists. This is the beginning of the journey, recognizing that everything you believed about awakening may be false, that there is no promise of guaranteed peace, no linear ascension, no enlightenment without collapse. Awakening is demolition. It's losing ground, seeing masks fall, feeling your identity dissolve. It's chaos presenting itself as master. And here arises the provocation. Do you still want to awaken? Or would you rather continue believing in soft, comfortable narratives sold as instant solutions? The choice is yours. But know that once the process begins, there is no turning back. The vision cannot be erased, the wound cannot be undone, the truth cannot be forgotten. The conclusion of this first part needs to be clear. Machiavelli is present in every line, reminding us that awakening is not a promise of peace, but an instrument of power. He would teach that every ruler must learn to deal with fear, because fear is the most stable emotion that moves men. You too must learn to deal with fear, not to escape it, but to use it as a guide. The fear you feel in the face of inner chaos is the same that can transform into courage. The pain you try to avoid is the same that can transform into strength. Awakening is not a blessing. It is a strategic choice, accepting destruction as the price of freedom. If you continue, you will need to go through the dark night of the soul, where neither reason nor faith will be enough. Only the courage to look within without filters will suffice. And with each step, you will remember the lesson that few dare to face. The truth does not liberate without first destroying. You believed the worst was over when you began to perceive the inner chaos, but it was only just beginning. The true descent begins now, and it has no map. It is the dark night of the soul, a territory without clear rules, where the mind unravels and emotions transform into violent currents that pull in opposite directions. Carl Jung described this journey as a plunge into the unconscious, but Machiavelli would understand it as a war. And in every war, ignorance is the primary cause of defeat. Those who do not understand the battlefield they tread upon are inevitably crushed. You must accept that you are entering enemy territory, and paradoxically, that enemy is yourself. It all begins almost imperceptibly, a nameless anxiety, a feeling that something doesn't fit, as if everyday life has lost its texture. Work seems mechanical, conversations seem hollow, relationships seem sustained by invisible and fragile commitments. It's at this moment that many people believe they're getting sick, but in fact, they're beginning to wake up. Think about how many times you've been in a meeting, hearing voices repeating memorized words, while inside you felt an absurd emptiness, or when you were surrounded by people, but the feeling was of complete isolation, as if everyone there was playing a role, and you were the only one who noticed. This everyday strangeness is the prelude to the dark night. It's the warning that the inner walls are about to crumble. Machiavelli would say that every ruler should be wary when the palace is too silent, because it is in this silence that conspiracies are born. The same occurs within the mind. When discomfort appears, it is not random noise, but a sign that internal forces are organizing, preparing to rebel against the fragile regime of the ego. And like any threatened tyrant, the ego will react violently, trying to restore the order that has always guaranteed its power. It will whisper, You're going crazy. This isn't normal. Go back to your old ways. Forget this strangeness. The ego is not a weak enemy. It is a cunning ruler, and it will do everything to keep you in the comfortable slumber of illusion. But you persist, remaining alert, and then the first collapses begin. Reality, which once seemed solid, now shatters into fragments. Logic no longer holds. Time loses its linearity. Old memories return with unexpected force. You recall forgotten traumas, unresolved grudges, childhood fears never faced. The present and the past blend together, as if the mind were a palace invaded by ghosts demanding to be heard. This experience is devastating because it robs you of control. Your body may be in an ordinary room, but inside you are already in another dimension, where every shadow takes on a life of its own. And here arises the first great dilemma: fight these images or listen to them. Machiavelli would advise against fighting a force that cannot be destroyed. He would say that the wise prince does not confront all his enemies at once, but learns to negotiate, to use fear as a tool, to transform weakness into an advantage. Perhaps the correct strategy is not to resist the voices, but to understand what they want to reveal. It's at this point that everyday experience merges with mystery. You're on the subway and suddenly feel as if everyone around you is an empty character, repeating mechanical phrases, staring at lifeless screens. You're at home and suddenly the silence becomes an unbearable weight, as if the walls breathe with you. You're in front of someone you love, but behind the smile, you perceive hidden intentions, repressed desires, power plays disguised as affection. This feeling of seeing beyond the surface is at once revealing and frightening. You realize that reality has never been simple, that every human gesture carries ulterior motives, that every word spoken in public conceals a secret calculation. It's at this moment that Machiavelli becomes your inevitable guide. He always knew that what governs men is not the ideal of virtue, but the invisible politics of desire, fear, and self-interest. Now you're beginning to see this not only in others, but also in yourself. This vision isn't free. It exacts a heavy price. Peaceful sleep vanishes. The mind becomes the stage for disturbing dialogues. Intense dreams pervade your nights, mixing symbols, voices, images of ruins and wars. You wake exhausted, as if you've lived through real battles while you slept. This is the sign that the journey has truly begun. You're no longer the same. You can no longer ignore what you've seen. You can no longer pretend not to notice. And it's precisely here that many retreat. They seek anesthesia, overwork, distractions, consumption, superficial religion, self-help phrases. All of these act like paid soldiers to protect the throne of the ego. But as Machiavelli would say, mercenary soldiers are never trustworthy. They abandon the battlefield at the first sign of a real threat. The same goes for these distractions. They may relieve the pain for a moment, but when the collapse returns, they return stronger and more relentless. You begin to realize that it's no longer about improving your life or achieving a state of peace. It's about surviving an internal war. The dark night is not a metaphor. It's a concrete experience. It's when you look in the mirror and no longer recognize who you see. It's when words that once seemed right now ring hollow. It's when close friends seem strange. It's when the future inspires no hope, only silence. This dissolution is violent, but necessary. The ego must crumble for something more authentic to emerge. Machiavelli would understand this as the inevitable fall of a corrupt regime. The more you try to preserve a decaying power, the more painful its ruin will be. The same goes for the identity you've built. It must die because it can no longer sustain the truth that's beginning to emerge. And there are times when this collapse becomes unbearable. You feel unjustified anger, burst into tears for no apparent reason, distrust everything and everyone. You walk the streets and notice looks as if charged with hidden intentions. A simple phrase can seem like a threatening riddle. An old memory can emerge as an accusation. It's as if your mind has become a minefield, where each step triggers an unexpected explosion. You try to rationalize, but reason has no power in this territory. What remains is the courage to carry on. Machiavelli would say that, in times of crisis, the prince should rely not only on fortune but on virtue, the ability to face adversity with cunning and firmness. Here, your virtue is the willingness to navigate chaos without giving up. Everyday life becomes strange. You're at a dinner table surrounded by people, and suddenly you notice the entire theater, the smiles that hide resentment, the compliments that conceal envy, the conversations that merely avoid awkward silences. This vision is painful because it shows that the world is not made of purity, but of silent calculations. Machiavelli observed this in every court he visited: alliances made to be broken, pacts that concealed betrayals, gestures of affection that were merely political masks. What you see now is no different. The difference is that before you participated unconsciously, now you observe with lucid eyes. And that changes everything. You can no longer believe in the spectacle as before, and the question that arises is brutal. How can you continue living in a world you no longer believe in? This is where the dark night reveals its perversity. It's not enough to destroy your old identity. It also demands that you face the void that remains. What do you do when nothing seems to make sense anymore? When certainties dissolve? When values lose strength? When even faith seems like a fragile construct? This emptiness is unbearable for many, and that's why they retreat. They return to sleep, cling to a new illusion, create a spiritualized persona, but deep down they remain imprisoned. Machiavelli would warn that men, when faced with chaos, prefer to surrender to a new tyrant, as long as he offers the illusion of stability. You must resist this temptation. You must endure the void without immediately filling it, because it is in this void that the new can be born. The mystery intensifies when you realize that even your own thoughts no longer seem your own. Inner voices arise, questioning, accusing, mocking. It's as if there are autonomous psychic forces within you, each fighting for control. And perhaps they do. Jung would call them autonomous complexes. Machiavelli would see them as internal factions, rival parties vying for the power to govern your psyche. In every republic, he said, there will always be contending parties, and the wise ruler doesn't try to eliminate them completely, but balances their forces using one against the other. Perhaps the strategy is similar here, not fighting to destroy every voice, but learning to negotiate with them, to listen to them, to understand their function. Awakening isn't about expelling demons. It's about dialoguing with them until you understand what they want. The dark night is a long, painful process, full of unexpected twists and turns. You may feel lost, but in truth, you are being torn from the illusion, and each fragment of pain carries within it a revelation. This is where Machiavelli becomes essential again. He knew that stability is never natural. It always needs to be built amidst chaos. And that is what you must learn, to govern chaos, not destroy it. Chaos never disappears, it only changes form. The question is whether you will be held hostage by it or learn to transform it into a source of power. The dark night is not the end. It is preparation. It is the training ground where you learn to live without illusions, to walk without ground, to endure the void. It is where it becomes impossible to believe in the spectacle again, but also where it becomes possible to build a more authentic presence. The hook for the next part is inevitable. So far, you've faced chaos and emptiness, but you haven't yet encountered the most dangerous enemy, the ego disguised as light. The dark night destroys certainties, but the ego is cunning and knows how to reinvent itself. As you begin to emerge from the chaos, you'll feel an irresistible temptation to believe you've won, that you've become enlightened, that you've become special. It's at this moment that the most dangerous trap reveals itself, and Machiavelli, a master at recognizing disguises, will be there to remind you that the ruler who believes in his own glory is one step away from ruin. You have traversed the chaos, endured the void, and faced the silence that seemed to devour the meaning of existence. However, the most treacherous terrain still lies ahead. Many believe that the pinnacle of awakening is surviving the dark night, but the truth is that this is only the first act. The second is even more insidious, because it presents itself not as explicit pain, but as a promise of glory. Here emerges the most dangerous figure of all, the ego disguised as light. It arrives not with screams or collapses, but with seductive whispers that affirm you have won, that you have reached an unattainable level, that you have become special. This is the invisible trap that brings down those who have managed to endure the initial chaos. Machiavelli would have understood this dynamic clearly, because he knew that the most vulnerable ruler is the one who believes his own propaganda. The ego is no fool. It watches silently as you go through pain, ruptures, and emptiness, patiently waiting for the right time to don something nobler. When it realizes you've survived the shadows, it sheds its mask and emerges as virtue. Now it no longer screams that you're weak, lost, or crazy. It whispers that you are enlightened, that you possess an understanding others will never have, that there's a unique greatness within you. This transformation is so subtle that few perceive the danger. You begin to believe you're safe just as you become a prisoner again. It's like a state that overthrows one tyrant only to crown another, dressed in more sophisticated clothes but with the same thirst for control. Can you sense this change in yourself? Or have you been seduced by the soft voice hiding behind pride? It is at this moment that the mind becomes the stage for a new spectacle. You speak of humility, but you need to be seen as humble. You preach compassion, but demand secret applause for your generosity. You engage in spiritual discourses, but every word is tainted by the desire for recognition. The cruelest thing is that often you don't realize it. You truly believe you've become a better person, but behind the scenes, the same ego that once hid behind vices and social masks rules. Now it wears white robes, speaks in the name of light, but acts like any power-hungry prince. How can you distinguish genuine virtue from disguised vanity? What if your spirituality is nothing more than a play written by the ego to deceive not others, but yourself? The inflated ego specializes in creating illusions of superiority. It makes you believe you are chosen, that you have a unique mission, that you have reached a level of consciousness inaccessible to most. This narrative is addictive because it feeds the oldest human desire, the need to feel special. Machiavelli observed this in rulers and courtiers. Power is never just about resources or territories, but about the image of greatness that keeps the ruler above others. The ego copies this same mechanism within you. It creates internal symbols, secret titles, invisible crowns. You come to believe you are not only different but superior. It is at this moment that the downfall begins, because the more one believes oneself to be invulnerable, the more fragile one becomes in the face of reality. Could this not be the most subtle form of self-destruction? The belief that there is nothing left to lose? The subtlety of this trap is what makes it lethal. When you suffer, you know you're suffering. When you're in a void, you recognize the discomfort. But when seduced by the voice of your ego, you don't perceive the danger. You feel good. You feel elevated. You feel at peace with the certainty that you've won the battle. It's precisely this feeling of victory that masks defeat. Machiavelli would say that a ruler should be wary whenever fortune smiles too much on them, because it's in those moments that enemies gather in the shadows. Likewise, when you feel you've achieved inner stability, perhaps it's just your ego consolidating its new throne. Have you ever wondered how many of your spiritual certainties are nothing more than fortresses built to protect your pride? How many of your calm smiles hide a look of judgment for those still in chaos? Imagine a simple scene. You're in a group of friends and someone shares their insecurities. Instead of truly listening, you secretly feel superior, as if you've already overcome it. Or in a conversation, someone expresses anger, and within you a silent thought arises. I've transcended this. I'm not like this anymore. This thought isn't neutral. It's the ego in disguise, creating an invisible boundary between you and others. Suddenly, you're no longer connected but separated. And this separation creates isolation, arrogance, and detachment from reality. Isn't this exactly what happens to leaders who believe themselves untouchable, only to fall, because they no longer understand the people they govern? The same fate awaits those who, deep within, allow their ego to rule in the name of spirituality. This process is even more cruel because it transforms awakening into a performance. You start meditating to be seen, speaking of virtues to be admired, practicing gestures of compassion to receive invisible applause. Everything becomes sophisticated theater, and the most deceived audience is you. Machiavelli said it's important to appear virtuous, but not to rely on virtue to govern. The ego applies this rule in reverse. It needs to appear virtuous to maintain power. It's a game of image, a carefully constructed illusion. How many times have you caught yourself acting not out of necessity, but out of self-importance? How many times have you turned your search for truth into just another showcase for admiration? The trap of the inflated ego lies not only in the isolation it creates, but in the prison it imposes. When you believe you've reached a level of enlightenment, you can no longer admit weakness. You can't show anger. You can't feel envy. You can't confess doubts. You need to maintain the image of the enlightened, the calm, the immune to chaos. And this need to appear perfect places you in a cell even crueler than ignorance. Now you not only suffer, but you must hide the suffering. You not only feel anger, but you must deny it. You not only doubt, but you must mask the doubt with smiles. Isn't this the most unbearable prison? The one in which you must act even when no one is watching? Machiavelli saw this phenomenon in the leaders of his time. Princes who believed so strongly in their own aura that they could no longer retreat, could no longer make mistakes, could no longer show vulnerability. They became prisoners of their own image. Some were destroyed not by external enemies, but by their inability to admit the truth about themselves. The same fate awaits those who allow themselves to be captured by the spiritualized ego. You believe you dominate your mind, but in reality, you are dominated by a persona constructed to sustain the illusion of grandeur. And when this mask cracks, the collapse is devastating. How can you sustain your own life when the image of perfection can no longer be maintained? What is left when the theater collapses, and you discover you were just another character trapped in your role? An inflated ego, therefore, is not just a threat. It is the crucible of the journey. Many endure the chaos of the dark night, but few survive the gentle whisper of greatness. It's easy to see when we're in despair, hard to recognize when we're being seduced by vanity dressed in purity. Machiavelli would say that a ruler should be more suspicious of smiling allies than of declared enemies. The same is true here. The declared enemy is chaos, pain, and emptiness, but the smiling ally is the spiritualized ego, offering peace and glory only to keep you in check. How many times have you believed you were advancing when in fact you've merely changed cells? How many times have you celebrated victory only to realize too late that you've once again been dominated? It is in this realm that the need for constant vigilance arises. Awakening cannot be treated as a definitive achievement, but as a continuous process of deconstruction. Each time you believe you have arrived, you must ask, who in me believes this? Each time you feel special, you must question, is this voice of the soul or of the ego disguised as a mission? Each time you see yourself as enlightened, you must ask yourself, what in me still remains dormant? These questions are weapons. They dismantle the illusion before it solidifies. They weaken the ego before it consolidates its throne. Have you ever tried looking in the mirror and asking yourself not who you are, but who is responding in your place? Have you ever tried questioning whether your compassion isn't just a desire for control, whether your kindness isn't just a desire for recognition? The suspense increases when you realize that the ego doesn't die, it merely transforms. It's like a political force that adapts, that changes its face, that adopts new languages to remain in power. You can't eliminate it, but you can learn to recognize it, and recognizing it is the first step to governing. Awakening isn't about expelling the ego, but about preventing it from ruling alone. It's about sharing the throne with something deeper, something that doesn't need applause, something that isn't supported by titles or certainties. But are you willing to let go of the feeling of superiority? Are you ready to be whole instead of appearing enlightened? Machiavelli said he preferred to govern men as they are, not as they should be. The same applies to you. You must deal with yourself as you truly are, not as you would like to appear. This requires courage, lucidity, and the willingness to see your vanity unmasked, your compassion tainted, your self-serving kindness. Only then can you prevent your ego from inflating to the point of destroying your connection with reality. The prince who believes himself divine loses touch with the earth and inevitably falls. The individual who believes himself enlightened loses touch with his shadow and inevitably disintegrates. The only real strategy is to remain alert, to be suspicious even of your victories, to not allow the silence of the ego to be confused with the voice of the soul. How many falls could be avoided if we had the courage to distrust ourselves? And here's the unexpected twist. Perhaps the greatest victory isn't overcoming the ego, but living with it without being ruled, accepting that it's present, that it will always seek power, that it will always try to disguise itself. The difference is that now you know, and this knowledge is your sharpest weapon. Awakening isn't about becoming pure, but about becoming a strategist. It's about looking within as Machiavelli looked at the corridors of power, identifying alliances, recognizing betrayals, observing hidden agendas. Only then can you stop being a hostage and become a commander. Are you ready to take on this role? Or do you still prefer to believe that there are no more enemies within you? The conclusion of this section needs to be clear and disturbing. An inflated ego is not a minor flaw. It is the journey's most dangerous trap. It turns seekers into self-centered gurus, transforms the vulnerable into false prophets, and turns awakening into a spectacle. You must decide whether you will continue this act or have the courage to dismantle the scene and face the empty stage. Remember, Machiavelli warned that the ruler who believes he has achieved absolute security is closer to downfall than he realizes. The same applies here. If you believe you have already arrived, you are more lost than ever. The question that remains is brutal. Can you bear to live without crowns, without titles, without delusions of grandeur? Because only in this emptiness is it possible to find the lucidity that the ego can never control. You believed that, after traversing the chaos, the void, and the traps of the ego, the world around you would finally make sense. You imagined that upon your return, you would be ready to share your discoveries, that those around you would recognize something different in you, perhaps even admirable. But this expectation is quickly shattered. Returning isn't a celebration, it's a shock. This inner awakening doesn't make coexistence easier. On the contrary, it makes it unbearably clear. Suddenly, you realize the masks everyone still wears, the manipulative games disguised as affection, the silent pacts of superficiality that keep relationships functioning. What once seemed natural now rings false. Parties become stages of collective distraction. Ordinary conversations reveal themselves as rehearsed choreography to avoid confronting the void. It's like returning from a war and finding your city pretending nothing happened, as if you were the only one who heard the roar of the abyss, while everyone else continues to smile to escape the echo. This is the point where loneliness sets in. You try to talk about what you've experienced, but the words sound too heavy for ears accustomed to comfort. When you try to explain the darkness you've endured, you notice confused looks, jokes to break the tension, awkward silences. Someone might even listen with apparent interest, but deep down, they don't really want to know. What you've seen threatens too much, disturbs too much, dismantles too many certainties. Awakening, instead of building bridges, creates chasms. You feel like you've lost your common language. Before, a simple comment about the future, about dreams or plans, was enough to maintain the bond. Now, nothing seems enough. You look into people's eyes and see secrets they themselves don't want to see. You hear a word and perceive the lie hidden behind it. You feel a laugh and recognize the muffled pain it tries to hide. The world hasn't changed, but your eyes have changed, and this change is irreversible. How can you continue living in a world where every gesture is revealed as a farce? How do you relate to people who still believe in the theater you can no longer support? Machiavelli already knew that truth is unwelcome among those who live in illusion. He wrote that men prefer to believe in appearances rather than face naked reality, because reality is unbearable. The wise prince must understand this weakness, exploit it, but never try to eliminate it. The same is true now for you. You've discovered how much social bonds rely on collective illusions, but trying to tear them away by force only generates rejection. You can't simply tell people they're living in a dream. They will punish you, not because they understand, but because they unconsciously sense that your presence threatens the fragile balance that keeps them standing. This is why the awakened often become strangers within their own lives. Friendships dissolve without explanation. Families grow apart without admitting it. Groups treat you with irony, as if there were something in you that no longer fits. You've done nothing but survive the awakening, but your lucidity acts as a mirror no one wants to look at, and this is where the tension mounts. You realize that the greatest challenge wasn't overcoming the inner collapse, but living in a world that remains asleep. The struggle now isn't against inner shadows, but against the social exile that lucidity brings. Imagine a scene. You're at a dinner party, surrounded by conversations about trivial matters. Everyone laughs, talking about fashion trends, TV shows, vacation plans. You try to participate, but every word feels like a burden, not because you despise them, but because you feel like none of it touches the essential. You notice the details, the slightly forced laugh, the look that averts when silence threatens, the rush to change the subject when something profound is mentioned. It's as if everyone is desperately clinging to the noise so as not to hear the emptiness you already know. And yet you remain there, smiling, pretending, until you realize that the mask you swore never to wear again is back. And then the question explodes. Is it worth pretending to belong? Or is it better to remain true and accept isolation? Machiavelli would teach that a ruler can never completely isolate himself, because power demands presence. But he also warned that mingling too much with the masses makes the prince vulnerable. The same dilemma presents itself now. If you close yourself off, you risk becoming a hermit, someone who abandons the world and loses the chance to transform one's experience into action. If you mingle too much, you risk losing clarity, anesthetizing yourself again, betraying yourself to fit into spaces that no longer make sense. The balance is unstable. You need to be in the world without drowning in it. You need to speak without losing your inner silence. You need to coexist without dissolving. It's a selective participation, as if it were a game in which every gesture must be calculated. Not because you want to manipulate, but because you need to survive. Have you ever noticed how much your presence alters the atmosphere? Have you ever noticed how the simple fact that you don't laugh at a joke changes the mood of an entire room? This is the invisible politics that governs relationships. You carry a difference that cannot be hidden, and this difference is disturbing. The return, then, becomes a battlefield, not against declared enemies, but against the weight of existing among those who have not yet awakened. And the cruelest thing is that there is no malice in it. People reject you not out of hatred, but out of an instinct for self-preservation. Clarity is contagious, but it is also threatening. It exposes cracks no one wants to see. Therefore, the world reacts with sarcasm, with distance, with silence. You become a stranger, even to those you love. Bonds weaken not for lack of affection, but because you no longer vibrate on the same frequency. You talk about abysses. They talk about distractions. You seek silences that heal. They seek noises that numb. This distance is painful because you still love these people, still care. But love is not enough to sustain a bond when consciousness no longer fits in the same space. And it's at this point that a turning point occurs. You begin to realize that perhaps awakening isn't just about you, but about the impact your presence has on the collective. It's not a choice to be different, but a choice about how to use that difference. You can close yourself off in resentment, believing no one understands you. Or you can accept that your role is not to be understood, but to be a silent witness to what lies beyond the masks. Machiavelli would say that the wise ruler doesn't reveal his entire vision, but chooses when and how to speak. The same is true here. You don't need to explain your journey to everyone. You don't need to prove anything. Sometimes the greatest strategy is to remain silent, observing, letting your lucidity act invisibly, like a force that changes the atmosphere without needing to be named. Have you ever felt how certain looks say more than entire speeches? Have you ever noticed how a simple refusal to participate in a farce dismantles the entire game? This return is brutal, because it forces you to reinvent yourself socially. You can no longer be who you were, but you also can't completely abandon the world. You need to create a new way of being present. It is at this moment that the inner temple is born, an invisible space within you that no one can invade. In it you can be whole even when the world demands fragments. You can be true even when you need to smile. You can carry silence even amidst the noise. This temple is not an escape, it is a strategy. It is what allows you to survive without losing what you have achieved. Machiavelli would say that every prince needs a secret council, a protected space where he can reflect unobserved. The same is true for you. This inner space is your invisible fortress. Without it, the return would become unbearable. With it, you can sustain the tension of living awake in a sleeping world. And yet, even with this refuge, the dilemma remains. How far should you adapt? How far should you remain silent? How far should you hide the truth to preserve bonds? And how far should you risk rejection in the name of authenticity? These questions have no definitive answers. They are decisions that must be made with every encounter, every conversation, every glance. It's a never-ending war, not against others, but against the temptation to betray yourself. Each day you choose between sleeping to fit in or staying awake and accepting solitude. And this choice is the true test of recovery. Have you ever noticed how much it hurts to remain silent so as not to lose someone? Have you ever felt the guilt of speaking the truth and watching the distance widen? This is the weight of living awake. There is no victory without loss, no lucidity without solitude. The suspense that remains is inevitable. The return is not the end of the journey, but the final test of endurance. You no longer fight against internal collapses or ego traps. Now you fight to remain whole in a world that prefers sleep. This is the longest battle because it has no end date. Each day is a test, each conversation a challenge, each connection a negotiation ground. Can you withstand this pressure? Can you live without betraying yourself, even when everything around you demands you pretend? Machiavelli would say that governing is sustaining the tension between opposing forces without losing your balance. This is precisely what the return demands. You have become a ruler of yourself, but now you must learn to govern your presence in the world. And this governance is unstable, precarious, always threatened. Yet, it is the only way to remain awake. And this is where the final chapter opens. Because a deeper secret still remains, something Machiavelli would hint at with his coldness, and Jung would confirm with his psychology. Awakening doesn't end with return. It demands a definitive death, a radical renunciation not only of external illusions but even of one's own virtues. The true outcome isn't about living among those who sleep, but about dying to everything inessential, allowing only the real to remain. And this death is the step few have the courage to take. Are you prepared to walk through the final door? Or will you return to settling for masks, now more subtle, but masks nonetheless? You've walked this far. You've endured chaos, traversed the void, braved the dark night, unmasked your inflated ego, faced the silent exile of return. Now you've reached the end point, which is also the true beginning. This is where everything that seemed like knowledge becomes experience. Everything that seemed like theory transforms into practice. And the truth is harsh. Awakening is not an achievement, not a title, not a medal. Awakening is a death, the death of what you believed you were, of what the world taught you should be, of what your mask maintained to fit into social games. What remains is raw, imperfect, contradictory, but it is real. And it is only in this reality that one finds the strength to live without betraying oneself. Machiavelli knew that governing is accepting the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. The same applies here. Awakening is accepting oneself as one is, whole, with virtues and flaws, with greatness and misery, with lights and shadows that cannot be denied. This acceptance isn't passive, it's a conscious demolition. It's looking within and destroying every layer of lies, every inherited ideal, every borrowed morality. Not to live without rules, but to live from within. It's like tearing down a decaying palace to build, on the ruins, a more solid and simple fortress. It hurts, because it requires renouncing the vanity of being seen as special. It requires giving up the need for approval. It requires accepting that you don't control the way others look at you. True control begins when you master the territory that truly matters, your own mind. Can you feel the depth of this challenge? Are you willing to let go of your image to find the truth that burns beneath it? Practical life will be the field where this awakening is tested. There's no point in surviving internal breakdowns if in everyday life you return to being a slave to the same patterns. The challenge begins in small situations. When someone disrespects you, do you resort to the same automatic impulse to react? Or can you maintain silence as a strategy? When you feel envy or anger, do you rush to disguise it under speeches of kindness? Or do you acknowledge the emotion, look at it, and learn to use it as a sign of where you still need to grow? When faced with difficult choices, do you seek the path of appearance or the path of internal coherence, which often comes at a high cost? It is in these everyday decisions that awakening materializes, not in the words you repeat, not in the images you project, but in the discipline of living in harmony with what you discovered amidst the ruins. Have you ever considered how many times you betrayed yourself just to be accepted? Have you realized how much this cost you in peace and dignity? Practice requires courage. Courage to lose friends, to displease family members, to abandon roles that once gave security. Courage to endure the silence that arises when you don't live up to expectations. Courage to be true instead of being admired. This is rare because it goes against everything we've been taught. From an early age, we learn to seek acceptance, to win applause, to maintain an image. But awakening requires the opposite, abandoning the theater, sustaining one's solitude, walking firmly even without an audience. Machiavelli would say that governing requires doing what is necessary, not what is popular. The same logic applies to you. Do what is necessary to remain true to yourself, even if it costs the admiration of others. Would you bear being seen as strange, cold, or distant just to avoid betraying your own lucidity? Are you willing to pay the price of integrity? The impact of this path isn't just individual. When you become real, those around you feel it. Your presence is no longer predictable, no longer manipulable, no longer a hostage to expectations. You become someone impossible to ignore, not because you seek it, but because truth, when embodied, commands respect. Silence becomes eloquent. Gestures become firm. Words, when spoken, carry weight. This is the strength born of awakening. It's not about dominating others, but about no longer being dominated by illusions. Machiavelli would say that the prince who governs himself fears no external conspiracies. Likewise, those who awaken no longer bow to social pressures. They can live, they can love, they can relate, but always lucidly, without losing their bearings. Can you imagine the power of being in the world without losing yourself in it? And the most unexpected thing is that, by abandoning the quest to appear enlightened, you finally find lightness. You no longer need to maintain a performance of perfection. You can admit mistakes, you can acknowledge flaws, you can laugh at yourself without fear of being unmasked, because there is no longer a mask. This is not a fall, it is freedom. Life ceases to be a field of constant staging and becomes a raw but authentic experience. The weight falls away. You no longer need to prove anything, no longer need to compete for who is most awakened, no longer need to measure strength in spiritual discourses. True victory is the simplicity of existing without carrying a persona, and this simplicity is more revolutionary than any discourse. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to live without the obligation of being admired? Have you ever considered the peace that exists in simply being, without putting on an act? This is the final call, to die to the character and be born as a presence. The character is the set of roles you use to survive, but which now no longer serve. Presence is what remains when all that was false has been destroyed. It needs no applause, no crowns, no titles. It is silent, firm, relentless. It is the strength that remains even in the midst of chaos. It is what remains when vanity no longer rules. It is what sustains when loneliness becomes inevitable. It is the flame that does not depend on external recognition. Are you willing to let die what was never you to allow this presence to be born? Are you ready to go through the final fire that burns away masks and leaves only the essential? The practice, therefore, begins now, not tomorrow, not in the distant future. Now, every choice can be made from persona or presence. Every gesture can reinforce character or affirm lucidity. You don't need grand rituals for this. You need attention and discipline. When you feel anger, ask yourself, am I reacting to uphold my character or to defend my truth? When you seek approval, ask, am I trying to be admired or trying to be real? When you fear losing someone, reflect, would I rather lose them or lose myself? These questions are simple yet powerful. They become compasses amidst the chaos. They are like Machiavellian advice given not to an external prince, but to you, ruler of yourself. And like every ruler, you will need these strategies daily to avoid falling into ancient traps. Awakening isn't comfortable, but it's liberating. It doesn't bring applause, but it does bring dignity. It doesn't guarantee constant peace, but it does guarantee solidity. You won't be immune to pain, but you will learn not to be a slave to it. You won't be free from the shadow, but you will learn to use it as fuel. You won't be isolated from the world, but you will learn to live in it without losing yourself. This is the true achievement, not to be perfect, but to be whole. Machiavelli preferred to be feared rather than loved, because fear generates stability more than love. Perhaps you need to apply this internally. Prefer to be true, even if it hurts, than to be loved by a false version of yourself. Because the love given to the character never reaches you. Only the respect earned by your presence reaches what is real. Would you rather live on empty applause or silent respect? This is the end of the journey. From here on, the path is yours. You can no longer say you don't know. You can no longer pretend you didn't hear. The truth has been spoken, naked, harsh, but liberating. Now you must decide what to do with it. Will you go back to sleep, recreate a comfortable character and fit back into your illusions? Or will you accept dying once and for all to be born as a presence, as someone impossible to manipulate, impossible to reduce, impossible to ignore? The choice is yours, and no one can make it for you. What you decide today will determine whether your life will remain a theater or finally become a true stage. If you've made it this far, it's because you've endured every part of the journey. You've endured the pain, the emptiness, the ego, the loneliness. Now the final act remains. Action. Don't settle for listening. Apply. Question yourself daily. Challenge your own impulses. Build your inner strength. And above all, allow what was never you to die. Only then will what was always waiting to exist be born. This is your opportunity to transform collapse into strength, loneliness into presence, shadow into strategy. Don't waste it. Because few get this far, but even fewer have the courage to take the final step. Now, I ask something simple. If this video spoke to you, if it touched something you might never have admitted, leave a comment. It can be anonymous. It can be a short sentence. It can just be, I died, but I'm being reborn. Write to make this commitment real. And if this content resonated, like the video, share it with those who need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Not out of vanity, not for numbers, but because this space is one of the few where the truth is told without disguise. Here, you will always find a call to lucidity, even when it hurts, even when it destroys. So if you wish to continue this journey, click now, subscribe, and stay with us. The next step may be the hardest, but also the most liberating of your life.